Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Mace. I'm the Assistant Director for Bloomfield Parks, Recreation, and Leisure Services for the town of Bloomfield, Connecticut. I'd like to welcome you to the Nature Lecture Series. This is a series that we have done with the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy for the last 6 years. We've had a lot of great success with it. Want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we'll have a presentation. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A section. And at the end of the webinar, I will read those questions, and Marjorie will answer the questions, and we'll go from there. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Kathy Blachowski, who is the Executive Director for the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that great introduction. Thank you for joining us today, everyone, and to Bluefield Parks, Rec, and Leisure Services for co-hosting. We are so grateful for your presence and your interest in protecting the natural places that make our region such a wonderful place to live. As Matt has referenced, I am Kathy Blachowski, the new Executive Director of the Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy. Our mission is to protect open space and promote public appreciation of the natural environment across our communities. We are a recently merged land trust serving the towns of Bloomfield, East Granby, West Hartford, and Windsor. By coming together as one organization, we are strengthening our impact through the shared services, regional collaboration, and a unified vision for conservation to protect the environment, preserve local farms, and connect residents with the outdoors. Today, the Conservancy protects 45 properties totaling 642 acres. If you've not already, please visit our website to learn more about our educational programs, our hikes, and land preservation and stewardships. You can also learn more about our upcoming events, including we have two hikes coming up on February 14th and 15th, and our March Nature Lecture Series with Bloomfield will be on bobolinks and warblers. Please consider volunteering or making a donation to support the work of the Conservancy. Thank you again for being here and for your interest in this fascinating topic of morticulture, the abundant life in old and dead trees. Our speaker tonight is Marjorie Winters, the Assistant Director at Roaring Brook Nature Center. Marjorie is a long-time nature instructor at the center in Canton, where she is delighted to share her passion for earth sciences and nature with students of all ages. She currently serves as the chair of the Simsbury Conservation Commission, is a member of the Simsbury Open Space Committee, and is the past president of the Simsbury Land Trust. Marjorie is also now a master woodland manager after completing the year-long course on woodland management offered as a partnership between the U.S. Forest Service, Connecticut Forest and Park Association, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, UConn, CIES, Audubon, Connecticut, and the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. Thank you, Marjorie, for sharing your expertise with us tonight. And without further ado, Marjorie Winters.
Thank you very much. And I'll get my program up here, share. All right. And let me get going on the slideshow. At the beginning. All right. Thank you very much. And I hope you're all intrigued by the name Morticulture. Kathy was saying that Word does not like spelling that one. He always wants to correct it. But morticulture was a term coined by Dr. Mark Harmon at Oregon State University 30 years ago. He chopped down trees to see what happened to them over time. And so he came up with this wonderful term morticulture. So usually when we look at the forest, we tend to look at them from the roots up, and we tend to look at just the trees. And if they're green, everything looks good. But sometimes, something dies, and if it's just one, we're not that concerned. If there are many, then we start wondering what is going on. But you look at trees and you think, well, which one is more valuable? We are conditioned to believe, the trees give a variety of things. They produce a lot of things that we value: shade, fresh air, habitat for wildlife. We like the looks of them. And they also produce, there's a value to the trees, certainly the lumber, the fuel, the pulp, chemicals we get from the wood, all sorts of things that trees are required for everyday life. But the question really should be what has more value to the forest? Now, the living trees certainly have a value, but what about those dead ones? Are they contributing or are they really more of a hazard to the forest? So this gets back to when I'm at Nature Center and we're doing life cycles of plants and animals. This is usually how the life cycle of a tree is presented. Especially an oak tree, you have the acorn, it sprouts, it turns into a young sapling, then becomes a mature oak, and that's where the seeds are coming from, the acorns are coming from. But there are things that are missing in this story, very important things that we just sort of gloss over. And that's the fact that the oak tree can live to be white oak can live 600 years, and many trees are very long-lived. And during that time, they also start to age. They start to senesce. Some of the branches start to drop off. They develop cavities. And then as the tree dies, it becomes a standing snag. And then if it topples over, it could become, a rotting log. So that rotting log is incredibly important to the life of the forest because that's where a lot of material is returned to the soil. It becomes rich organic matter or humus in the soil, and that is where the acorn has to fall in order to start its life again. So that part that it's not just good enough that the tree is mature, the older part of the tree, the senescing and the decaying of the tree is essential to that life cycle of that oak. Now, in our woods, you can often see very old trees, big trees, that don't look anything like the rest of the trees. And I love this one, has its own sign. This is a wolf tree, and you can see it's a very important tree, and it's really valuable for wildlife. So how did we get these old trees? Well, they started off in the middle of a pasture. They're called wolf trees, not because they have anything to do with wolves, but because they stand all by themselves. And they were left in the fields, sometimes to help pull out the other trees from the pasture, but also to shade the horses and sheep and cows and whatever that was in the field on a hot summer's day. Now, and this is, going back to, what Connecticut looked like. Forest, a default setting for Connecticut. But by 1830, we had pretty much denuded all of Connecticut. Only 20% of the forest remained, and this was mainly to pasture sheep that the forests were denuded. But as I said, occasionally one was left. But now, of course, we've completely reversed that. The Connecticut is now about 60% forested. So what do we see in our woods now? Whoops, get rid of that. Sorry about that. Whoops, enough. Okay. So if you go into a lot of our forests now, especially our managed forests, this is what we see. We see younger trees. Now there are a variety of ages there, none of the old trees, but we don't see anything on the ground. And there's no coarse woody material is what it's called when the material's on the ground, whether it's branches, but mainly the logs. You don't see anything there. And this is a bit of a concern. So how do we get the tree that woody material on the ground? Well, ice storms, wind storms, the limbs fall off, crash to the ground, maybe the whole tree will crash. A microburst, this is what happened in the Adirondacks a couple of decades ago, a lot of trees down in that particular region. But we also get things like this happening once in a while in New England. And this was the result of the Great Hurricane of 1938. We don't get many hurricanes in New England, but when they come, they can cause a lot of damage because we're very heavily forested. So this was a huge, huge event, mainly on the eastern side of Connecticut and up into Massachusetts. And all that valuable lumber was on the ground, and it was very quickly harvested and taken away. We also have things like the spongy moth, formerly known as the gypsy moth defoliation. This was, has affected certain areas of Connecticut, especially during times of drought, when the fungus that keeps the spongy moth in check doesn't thrive in those dry conditions. So some of the trees were defoliated, some of them did die, and it's left a lot of dead trees. And we're always very concerned about having a lot of dead trees and it's been really brought to bear with the news coming out of the West with the forest management issues. A lot of times they just plant one kind of tree because that's the kind of tree we want for lumber. Also, this tree diversity out west is not as great as in the east. So when one tree dies, a lot of them do die. And sometimes it's due to, drought. Sometimes it's due to pine bark infestations, bark beetle infestations. And the concern is always it's going to go up in flame. And there's a wonderful book I encourage you all to read. It's a very great title, Ecological Importance of Mixed Severity Fires, Nature's Phoenix. This doesn't really apply as much to the eastern forests, which tend to be wetter and not a fire. Uh, an ecosystem that requires fire to regenerate, but the western forests do require forests to generate. So there's been a lot of studies going on with the forest out west. And the thing to remember is that when there is a forest fire, not all the trees, they're not all burnt to ash. There are a lot of dead standing things afterwards, a lot of dead snags, the standing trees afterwards. And that wood is charred. But it also is resistant to decay. That charring doesn't rot away, it prevents those trees from decaying. So they can stand for quite some time as the forest regenerates. You can see in this picture that shrubs and young trees are starting to come in. But those dead trees actually are an attractant to this little creature. This is the blackback woodpecker. And the blackback woodpeckers will actually follow the fire smoke to go to those areas where the trees are burnt, because this is where they will preferentially make nesting cavities. And once they're in that area, they start to make nesting cavities for a whole host of cavity nesting birds, and a lot of other insects and fungi will come in and help start the decay process for these trees. But they are essential for the recovery of that forest. And in areas where that wood that is not completely burnt is salvaged, it's been found that those forests don't recover as quickly as the areas that were just left to recover on their own. And that's in part because of the machinery that's brought in. It damages the young seedlings that might be there. It compacts the soil, making it more difficult for new plants to grow. And those removal of the snags and that dead material on the ground is really taking away a lot of organic material that is should be decaying on the ground, providing a nice safe place for the seedlings to generate. So it really does slow down, even though it looks, that you've been saving all that lumber, but in the end, the forest doesn't recover nearly as quickly. So all those dead trees in the forest are, as I said, the standing ones are called snags, and they're actually an incredibly important part of the forest. They provide a whole host of services to the ecosystem, the forest ecosystem. But how a tree dies really determines its role in the ecosystem. So there are many ways a tree can die besides forest fire and those insects. Beavers will girdle trees, or porcupines will also. That tree is not going to be alive for much longer. And certainly the branches are cut down. When the beavers fell a tree, that will add organic matter to the soil as well, the coarse woody material. But when a beaver floods an area, they also kill trees. As the area is flooded in the foreground, you can see the beaver dam, and that lovely little creature there, one of our ecosystem engineers. But those dead trees also become homes for creatures such as the great blue heron, who love to nest up in the trees using the old sticks and things the beavers have removed the bark from and eaten for lunch. But those trees also then provide nesting cavities for wood ducks and for a whole host of insects and other creatures. The dead trees are also very valuable in the woods for the perching raptors. They get a good sight of what's down below them. And the other animals that can affect the trees is sapsuckers. This is the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And all of those trees, they can not only girdle a tree, preventing the nutrients from moving up and down the tree, but they also are entry points for disease and fungus and wood-boring insects. And the timber industry does not like the sapsuckers because they do lower the value of the wood. And speaking of insects attacks, here we have some bark-boring beetles. You can see the wonderful patterns that they create on the wood. The adult weevil beetle will lay her eggs in a nice straight line, and you can see these radiating lines coming off the off this line where the eggs were. As the little eggs hatch, they fan out, and as they grow, their tunnels get bigger and bigger until finally they emerge and pupate and leave. But this is a way that one of the ways that weaker trees are old and weakened trees are end their lives. And those beetles under there, you can see that the trees killed by bark-boring beetles are actually great feeders for, or as food supplies for the woodpeckers and the other insect-eating birds. And you can see all these trails that the insects have made. That is their frass, which is the scientific polite way of saying their insect poop. But you can see they've eaten their way through the cambium layer, which is the living layer right under the bark of the tree. But where these beetles get in there, it's like a little grocery store for all the various birds in the woods that eat these things. Now, in areas where there aren't enough dead trees, you can create your own dead tree. This is the technique that is suggested by the forestry industry, that you can create a snag by cutting in and creating that cambium. But the only thing is it doesn't work as well as the ones that are created naturally. The ones that are created naturally, the bark beetle kill trees, actually provide greater woodpecker feeding activity. They're better for cavity building. They have much greater diversity. So if you're creating the snag for wildlife, the better way is to let them develop themselves. Now, how do they do that? Well, you want those little bark-boring beetles to carry the fungal spores into the tree. And here's why. So if we look at a tree, you can see that on the outside is the bark, and that's the part that protects the tree from the insect. It usually contains nasty chemicals that the insects don't like to eat. But if they can get past, the insects can drill through that, they can get to the cambium layer, which is the right under the bark of the living part. You can see all the different rings, the light rings here, where this is the living part. And the sapwood usually contains a sap that can force the beetles out. You can see, remember the pine trees with the sap that comes out when something you drill into it. And then the heartwood is the non-living part of the tree, and usually it's where the tree puts some pretty nasty chemicals it doesn't want anymore. And this part provides the structural integrity to the tree. The sapwood is the living, growing part of the tree. So you have to bear that in mind, because how the tree dies makes a very important role. Things happen differently if the tree is alive, when it has decay, as opposed to when it's dead. So if a tree is live, this is the dead part of the tree, the decay resistant, but this part, the sapwood, is able to protect itself. It has chemicals that will force out or heal itself from the insects or disease. So if the sapwood is intact, it's very hard to damage the heartwood. But if a tree is dead, the sapwood is the easiest to attack first. So here we go. This is a tree, and you can see in this case, a small branch broke off, and the tree was able to seal it off. The sapwood protected the tree, and fungus can't get in. In this case, there was a little cut on the side of the bark, and the sapwood was sufficient to seal this off and protect the inner part and the structural part of the tree from further damage. However, on this picture, you can see this, this picture, you can see that a bigger branch was broken, and the sapwood wasn't able to form a seal around this opening. The bark-boring beetles are able to get in here with the fungus, and the fungus was able to get in here. If you have really deep cuts on the bark, the fungus can get in, and if there's root damage, if someone's pruned a root, that's another way for the fungus to get in. Once the fungus gets into the heartwood, so here's a fungus on the outside. This is a tree that was just chopped down or fell over, and you can see it's rotting from the outside in. This part gets very punky on the outside, and this part, the heartwood, is a little more resistant to decay. This is especially true with evergreens. So here you can see the fungus, and you can see this if you ever see a tree that's cut across the trail. You'll always find the fungus on the outside. You won't find it in the heartwood, and it'll take a while for the heartwood to break down. But this is the easiest area to attack when the tree is already dead. When it's alive, it's able to protect itself. But this is what happens with the heartwood rot. When the fungus gets into that heartwood, that's there's a certain different kind of fungus that will affect the inner part of the tree. And this is where you get the hollow trees. Now, this tree is going to be very interesting as far as wildlife. But for this to happen, you have to have a major limb damage or a major cut or a root or something like that for it to get in. Otherwise, this bark is protecting the tree very nicely here. This tree is still alive. The growing areas are right under the bark, but structurally, it's not as strong. And you can see all the different kinds. Some of these holes are quite big, some of them are small. You can see the tree is still trying to, the sapwood is still trying to cover that up and heal over that wound, just as when we get a cut, we get a scab and it closes over. So here's a tree that died, but it's being attacked by woodpeckers. You can see it's being attacked from the outside in. This one didn't suffer heart rot. It's died from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. So these are really incredible, important species for the wood. Now, some birds will attack for the forest. Some birds will attack live trees, but most of them will go after the sick or dying ones. They will use these. We have several kinds of woodpeckers, and they're incredibly important to our forests. So we have a variety of them, and they all have different abilities to make cavities. Certainly the pileated was one of the better ones for making bigger cavities. And once those cavities are made, then they support a whole range of native bird species on the snags for at least a portion of their life cycle, usually during their nesting period. And even chickadees are able to excavate old holes in trees. You can see this tree has got a lot of saprophytic fungi on it. It's rotting this tree, so it's making the wood very punky. And the woodpecker and the chickadee with its very tiny beak can still excavate a hole in the tree. But most of the holes and the cavities holes for a lot of our nesting birds, our cavity nesting birds, are made by the woodpeckers. And of course, it's not just for birds, but it can also be for things like squirrels or raccoons. And the larger the cavity, the larger the bird that can use them. Here's a big standing snag, and it can be used by the black vulture or the turkey vulture. And this is inside an old hollow tree. And they're chicks. And of course, you can see all sorts of animals use even just the tops of the snags that you can't see. That's that little guy hiding right there. Now, and even the base of these basal scars provide great protection during winter or storm events. And bats will go up there and roost inside the hollow tree. There are a lot of these are incredibly valuable wildlife habitat trees. And the bigger the tree, the bigger the animal that can roost or hibernate or roost or stay or den in these trees. This tree was at the end of someone's yard in West Simsbury, and they were very surprised to see the bear poking out from it. Eventually, the snag will fall over, and those hollow logs then become beautiful denning sites and winter protection for a whole host of mammals. But how long does it take for a log to rot on the ground? Well, if the whole tree fell over and it's not touching the ground and it's on a dry site, it could be there for many, 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 many years. It's going to take a long, long time for it to rot away. If it's in contact with the ground, however, it could decay as many as 15 to 20 years. It needs that contact with the moist soil in order to get the fungus to go into the tree. There are very few things that can eat wood, but fungus is one of the best. And sometimes you can see, stumps, and certainly in the figures that said the stumps in the Midwest took between 25 to 50 years. And sometimes these old stumps, they don't look like they're doing much. They're actually supported sometimes by the other trees through the mycorrhizal network of fungi. They're actually being fed underneath, but you can see this one's being decayed and other things are starting to grow on it. Here's one that's being decayed by the saprophytic fungus, which are the ones that eat wood. These look a little bit like, cousins of the turkey tails. And you can see there are all sorts of different fungi that are associated with different kinds of wood. But eventually it will break down. And as it breaks down, it gets smaller and smaller. And this is where you get that lovely organic matter for the thing. But if you've ever gone for, I'll just go back to this one. If you've ever gone for a walk in the woods, you can see that there are different colors of rottenwood and different textures of rottenwood. Over here, we have something called brown rot, and over here, we might have something called white rot. These are two different kinds of fungus, and they act differently. So the brown rot fungus eats cellulose and leaves the decay-resistant lignin. So it eats all the white stuff and leaves the brown stuff behind. And it ends up looking very chunky and dry and powdery. But the white rot eats the lignin and leaves the cellulose. And this one feels very spongy. If you pick it up, it often feels wet. It's fibrous. It has a totally different look from the brown rot. And so you can see, but the brown rot adds a lot to the soil organic matter, and the white rot actually acts like a sponge and keeps things nice and moist on the forest floor. So those old dead logs also, because of the fungus and the punkiness of the wood, actually act as lovely little incubators for the new germinating seeds. They can either be a nurse stump or a nurse log. You can see all the little things growing up here. Some in the moss, first comes the moss and then these little seeds. And sometimes you can see years later and see how long it takes for those logs to decompose. Here you can see the little seedlings have started on top of this log. Sometimes you can look for those in the woods and you can see how the roots are growing over around. And if you've ever seen one of those trees with the roots totally above something and there's nothing underneath, it means that they grew on a nurse log and the nurse log has totally rotted out from underneath them. But these logs on the ground are, especially when they're not just little branches, when they're whole logs, they are a prime source for organic matter in the forest soil. And this is why, the removal of these, the harvest after that salvage harvesting after a tree fall it's not particularly a good idea. And I know with land trust, we often just chop off the middle of the tree that might have fallen over a trail, roll that part off to the side and just leave the tree there. And, for the health of the forest, that's the best thing. But often people will say in an area where there are a lot of trees on the ground that it looks really messy. But that's actually what a forest should look like. It should have a lot of things on the ground. It means that some of the trees have maybe become diseased and fallen over, but they will be adding organic material to the ground. They provide shelter for a lot of different creatures. But they also, there's something called stem exclusion, where if you have a young forest, not all those trees are going to grow to maturity. Some of them are, maybe weren't as strong, maybe they didn't grow in the right place, and they are going to die and topple over. And that's the natural process in a forest. You shouldn't have a pristine, clear forest floor. So, giving you a hint that the dead trees are really, really important to 2/3 of all our wildlife species. So they use the trees either when they're standing or dead at some portion of their life cycle. And the ones that we really paid very little attention to are the little guys. This is E.O. Wilson, and I love his quote that insects are the little things that run the world. And these are some of those little guys. The termites can digest wood. They have a bacteria in their gut that can help them to digest it. And the wood-boring beetles will chew their way through, and the carpenter ants will also they chew their way through to make their nesting tunnels. But there are very few insects that can eat wood. But ants are one of the biggest invertebrates in our forest ecosystems, and they're really, really important. And a lot of them nest in the decaying heartwood and the rotten wood. And when the wood starts to rot, the carpenter ants move in and they remove the rotten wood to free up space for them to nest. And you can often see this sawdust that's around the end of a log. And so that sawdust decays very quickly, gets into the soil, adding to the nutrients, returning those nutrients. It's all one big recycling process that goes on in the woods. And the ants are very important for keeping the trees healthy because they are the ones that are going to patrol the trees, looking for things that are eating the trees. They're going to be stinging and eating, taking the caterpillars back to their home. So they're very important, especially in areas where there are spongy moths and tent caterpillars. The ants are the ones that are keeping their populations in check. So here we've got this wonderful indirect mutualism. So the trees provide ants with shelter, the ants feed on the caterpillars, and the ants waste their frass then is fertilizer for the trees. So the trees need the ants need the trees. It's a wonderful system. And these are the unsung heroes of the our spring wildflowers too. Ants have the plants have a wonderful relationship with ants whereby they put this interesting thing on the outside of the seed called an elaiosome, which has nothing to do with the seed. It's a bribe for the ants to take the seed back underground to their ant hills, and the ants will take this elaiosome off the seed, give it to it's a very high fat lipid um, nutrient. They'll feed that to their larvae, and then they're stuck with this big seed they don't want anymore. So where do they put it? They dispose of it in the place where they dispose all their old dead things and waste, essentially in a compost pile under the soil. So there, the ants are planting the seeds. But the ants themselves become food for an incredible amount of wildlife. You can see this little guy going eating some of those ants, so the birds are keeping them in check. And then the old trees also become homes for a lot of different nesting pollinators, some of the bees, minor bees, colonial bees, solitary bees. A lot of them will nest either in the ground, in the forest, or in that lovely soft ground, or they'll do it in an old dead tree. And then those pollinators then become the things that perpetuate the forest by pollinating a lot of the shrubs, like this dogwood. Carpenter bees will nest in old punky wood and make tunnels, helping decay those trees, and then going on to pollinate. And all that woody debris, this is a scene from one of our classes at the Nature Center. There's nothing more exciting than looking under an old log. There are lots of things to find. Unfortunately, a lot too many earthworms at the moment, but there's so many things to investigate under an old dead log. All the pill bugs and centipedes and millipedes and spiders and all the little creatures that then in turn, some of them, are things that help all speed up the decomposition, and some of them keep other ones in check. But every time we remove that old dead stuff that looks so messy in the woods, thinking it's going to be a fire hazard, or there's going to be a beetle outbreak, it robs the soil of all the food that feeds those microorganisms. And all that dead stuff, the leaves, the twigs, the branches, the trunks are all incredibly important for the recycling process and feed the microcommunity that helps support the whole ecosystem. Those little microorganisms become food for all sorts of creatures like the salamander, that you can find them under old dead logs, eating all those little detritivores that are under the log. And salamanders should be the most abundant vertebrate animal in the woods. If you added up all the salamanders in the woods, there should be more of them than there are deer or raccoon or anything else in the woods. You don't always see them. A lot of them come out at night. They feed. They're hiding under all that organic material. If you don't have that organic material, you don't have the nice refuge for these creatures. So these are incredibly important creatures because they will eat all those beetle larvae, the fly larvae, and all those little creatures that are on the ground. So they're helping keeping those in check. And then in turn, they become a major source of food for many species in our forest, like the shrew and these birds. I mean, I was very surprised to learn that turkeys eat salamanders, but they do. And here's a little snake, a garter snake, a ribbon snake. So there are more than 40 different vertebrate species that rely on the presence of this dead wood on the ground. The nice thing about this dead wood is that, even during dry periods, it often remains wet. It might be the last wet place left in the woods. So a lot of these creatures will gravitate to these areas as a drought continues. But these nesting songbirds are, as we said, play an important part in keeping all these insects in check. So you want the insects for the decay, you want the birds to keep them from getting out of control. So there's this interwoven tapestry of things going on. And here, when you do have the decay, when you do have the beetles, I mean, here you can see a little spider attacking one of the larvae. But these, and here's all that frass, the beetles eating it, the mushrooms are eating up, everything's eating it up. And then you've got the bigger recyclers helping come in, the woodpeckers, the bears, and the skunks. They're ripping apart the logs, putting holes in them, allowing them to get into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually turning it back into that organic, rich soil that the forest floor needs. And again, in these old rotting logs, they have refuges for snakes and mice and shrews, all sorts of creatures. And then the mushrooms that are growing on these old trees feed a lot of different animals. I know we're always very cautious, and we should be going out and eating various mushrooms in the woods. You have to have a lot of skill, but they know what they're doing. But they will feed on the fungus that's really the ones that are the greatest decomposers of the wood in the forest. And you've often seen these wonderful things on the ground. Sometimes just these little tiny branches are the ones that have the most lichen on them. This is the green shield lichen. And often there's more of it on the branches than there is on than on the tree themselves. And this is often used to camouflage the nests of the ruby-throated hummingbird or the blue-gray gnatcatcher. They will use that to sort of make it blend in, protect their young. And the interesting thing is, this is part of Dr. Mark Harmon, the fellow who coined morticulture. He, in his research of the trees that he's cut down, he's found that and the ones that he studied, and a lot of other researchers, they found that there are so many different varieties of lichen on the older trees. The older a tree gets, the more its lichen population increases. So it's much more complicated. And if you lose those old trees or those old dying trees, the ones that if you just cut them down in the prime of life, they're not going to have the diversity of fungi that the older trees are going to have. And this is something that's really becoming a hot topic for investigation. They're only starting to realize that the importance of the fungi and the decay system. Now, it's always been known that the fungi might deprive us of some timber. There are certain honey mushrooms that are really, really good at killing trees. We don't want that in our logging forests. But in other areas, this is the dead wood has more life in it than the living wood in many cases. When a tree falls on a bank, it also helps stabilize the soil and stabilize the slope. They reduce erosion, and you can see, little seedlings will start to grow up there. And it's also these logs also have a way of protecting the seedlings from, especially when a whole bunch of trees have fallen down. It protects protects the seedlings from the deer browse because it's very difficult for the deer to get through and eat them up. And one of the surprising things is also important for stream restoration. It used to be probably 50 years ago that you needed to pull, there were great efforts to remove all the dead stuff from the wood, from the streams. That was thought to help the streams, but actually no. The more dead wood in the streams, the more habitat there is. And actually trees are now put into streams that are being restored. And they slow down the velocity of the water and they allow sediment to settle out before washing downstream. So these areas, then they found that when they put more wood in the stream, there are actually more fish. And when there are more fish, you actually get more fish-eating birds. So wildlife is attracted to these areas because there is more life where there is dead wood. And in Finland, they're starting to reconsider their whole way that they've done forestry, because they've gone in very systematically, removed all the things. But every time this is going on, you are removing that organic matter from the soil. You're compressing the soil with forest equipment. I know forest equipment has as tires that you don't get that much compression, but there are logging roads and all the things to go in. So what the rewilding teams are they're starting to rethink the decades of way they've done things. And there's a whole lot of new research into how to do it in a different way than what has been done in the past. All sorts of new ways. We still need wood. We still need forests that we can harvest. But we also might need forests that we don't harvest. And if you look at some of our managed state forests, it was more of an anomaly to see this log, but you can see nothing else. There are no wolf trees. There's some young trees. They're going to be growing up to be old trees eventually, we hope. But usually there's a cycle that every 10 years, a new part is harvested. So over 100-year period, that whole forest will be harvested, and the trees will reach maturity, but then they will never reach senescence. They will never fall to the ground. All the trunk of the tree is called the bole, and the boles are all the valuable wood. They're all hauled away, and only branches and things are left on the ground. This was a site I saw when I was doing my woodland manager course, and yes, there are a lot of branches there, but those branches won't last long. Branches rot at a lot faster rate than the large trunks of the trees. So, there were a few trees that were left, supposedly for seeds. This area was growing back into brush. And a lot of the trees, the crowns of the trees, which were not valuable, were lining this whole field to keep the deer from coming in and eating the seedlings. That was a big concern. However, there was a patch nearby of invasive plants, and I'm very concerned that invasive plants would then get into this area, where they weren't in the original forest. So this was a tree cut that was done because they were concerned about deer browse. So rather than manage the deer population, it was easier to cut down the forest. So it was a bit confusing. But I was very concerned about the lack of anything that's going to become old, and the paucity of woody debris on the ground. And this is just a historical look at what our forests were. The eastern forests were in the 1600s were pretty vast. By 1850, we had done a good job. You can see Connecticut is beautifully clear of old growth forest there. And here by 1926, there were just packed tiny patches of virgin forest, and practically none at all by 1990. Now, there are some patches of old growth forest. There's a certain characteristic for old growth forest, and we're not going to get into that, but it's a fascinating subject to look at. But old growth forest with these wonderful old trees, they're not all old. There will be some big ones and a lot of little ones. And old growth forest has a diversity of age stands to it. But it is one of the rarest habitats that we have. In Massachusetts, we don't have good figures for Connecticut, but I think it's probably even less. Massachusetts has less than 1/10 of 1% of forests that have old growth characteristics. And that is a bit concerning, because the old growth ones do harbor more diversity. And most of the old growth forests were in areas where they couldn't be harvested, like ravines or inaccessible areas. So there is a group called the Old Growth Forest Network. I hope some of you have joined. And they are trying to find these old pockets of what could become or are at the start of becoming old growth forests. And one of them I encourage you to go to is Belden Forest. It's right behind the Simsbury Library. It's a little hard to find the trail entrance. It's between the library and the old Boy Scout Hall. And it was the first listing of an old growth forest in Connecticut. And it has some absolutely magnificent white pines that are upwards of 160 plus years. It did have some beech, but birch rather, beech. But unfortunately, it's being affected by a lot of the diseases, but the white pines are magnificent. Now, the interesting thing with this is they could all be blown down tomorrow. This is only a 40-acre wood, but our town did have a management plan for it, and the management plan called for harvesting to increase the age diversity of it. But the interesting thing is when you have an old growth forest, the ages are diverse. You can see seedlings coming up here. And when an old tree dies, it usually creates an open canopy area for the sunlight to come in, and new things do regenerate. So the old growth forests are not all old trees. They are old trees and young trees, and they do have a wonderful look to them. And it is rather impressive to see the magnificent old growth. So if this is left and if it's not hit by a windstorm or a drastic ice storm or something, these trees will be there for many more, many more years, and it'll take on even more characteristics of old growth. I just wanted to say there was one Cathedral Pines in Cornwall. It was hit by a microburst, and I never got to see it. It was destroyed before I moved, I think, to Connecticut. And but there's still some off-site from this that still have those characteristics. So a few more of these forests are being added. And then we have to think about how we want to talk about, when we manage land, certainly as a land trust or a town, are we really do we have enough land for logging? I know at Simsbury Land Trust, we've looked at our trees, and we've had foresters come in to look, and there's really nothing that valuable there. And it's been our stance for the last few years that there's no advantage for us to log. The idea that we're logging it for the health of the forest doesn't quite make sense to us. But there's this term called proforestation, and it's the practice of protecting existing natural forests to foster continuous growth, structural complexity. But I would like to add to that term and wildlife diversity, because it is these old dead trees that really add the wildlife diversity to our forests. They're very, very important from that point of view. So, there are certain places for lumbering activity for harvesting. But, there is an argument to be made, I think a very good one, for leaving some of them just to self-organize. And I know we did have one person on our conservation commission when we were looking to see whether we would approve a forest management plan, which we ultimately rejected. And one of the commissioners said, well, I don't know if I like the look of an old growth forest. Yes, but it's not about us. And I don't know why you wouldn't like the look of the old growth forest, and how would you know, unless you studied it? So I love this quote. This is by Aldo Leopold. The real jewel of my disease-ridden woodlock is the conitheri warbler. The flash of its blue and gold plumage and the dank decay of the June woods is in itself proof that dead trees are transmuted into living animals and vice versa. And this is my favorite dead tree. This is in McLean Game Refuge. I love the two eyes, the nose, the mouth, and then someone's put this lovely stick in there. They have a character all to their own. Sadly, a lot of our old wolf trees are decaying very rapidly, and they're at the last because they've been standing there for hundreds, maybe 200 years, and they're at the end of their senescence and decay. So it's odd for us to see these old dead trees in the woods. And I think it's very important that we have these old dead trees and senescing trees. After all, we are Connecticut, because Connecticut's Constitution was hid exactly in one of these old hollow trees, the Charter Oak. So we're here because of an old dead tree. Otherwise we might be Massachusetts or Rhode Island. So I hope when you go into the woods, you look at that old dead wood, look at that old brown rot, and the brown rot and the white rot, and look at all the trees and view those things on the ground as habitats, as the fact that we need more dead stuff. We need more standing dead stuff. We need more things that are on their way out. So they're not a sign of a decaying, unhealthy forest. They are the sign of a forest that is recycling itself. So I want to thank you for inviting me to share this topic with you. I'm going to stop share. And does anyone have any questions?
All right, that was fantastic, Marjorie. Thank you. Give Marjorie just a sec. And as she said, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A. Doug Rankin said this was a wonderful presentation. I learned so much, and thank you.
Excellent. As I said, this is not this is something it's rather new. I mean, there are more and more people talking about it. But if you go with a strictly forest management approach, I know when I was taking the course, we were stepping over all sorts of, the occasional dead log, and it was rotting. And I was asking the instructors, and they were wonderful instructors, and I learned an awful lot. But I was asking them about woodpeckers, and they said, "Oh yeah, woodpeckers." But you could tell they were harmful to the lumbering industry.
Mhm.
But I was also asking about salamanders, and yeah, salamanders. So, there has to be, some middle point that we come to, that we need some parts of the woods that are just left to become old growth.
Absolutely. Um, Jamil Raglan, thank you very much for the presentation. Trees are so fascinating.
Right.
Kathleen Hayes, thank you for a great presentation. Faith Antian, absolutely fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. Jennifer Frank, great talk. Reinforce is much of what I thought, and I never thought about the fungi hastening the rot. Okay. A comment. Your favorite tree in McLean is our favorite. I have a wonderful photo with a snake skin hanging out of the mouth.
Lovely. That's lovely.
That's from Paula Jones. Um, Tom Weldman, intentional introduction of mushroom spores.
That's a question.
I
I don't know.
guess. I'm not
I don't
sure.
know. I don't know which mushroom. I mean, because there's so many. I think nature does it all by best by itself. So, if you cut up, I think if you wanted to create a snag rather than girdling the tree, if you
Hmm.
wanted to make a really good wildlife tree, the better way would be to chop off a large branch and let nature take care of it from that point on. Then the fungi will find their way. The insects, the beetles carry the fungus on their bodies, and they will get into the tree. So you don't need to go to heroic measures. Nature's been doing this for hundreds of millions of years, and it's got the system all worked out. But yeah, if you have a tree you want to turn in the woods, rather than girdling it, just chop off a couple of its major branches, and you will get a hollow tree. It'll take a long time, but it will.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Bet Harderson, I loved your last old dead tree. I also have a favorite snag, BJ. And then an anonymous attendee said thank you.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
that if we have any more questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. I know we have an upcoming lecture coming up next March 3rd, Wednesday, March 3rd, on warblers and bobolinks, and that will also be on Zoom.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Thank you so much, Marjorie.
Okay.
Oh, I've got one.
Oh,
I'm sorry, one more.
all right.
Irene Scheibner, what can be done to help a tree that is trying to cover over an open wound?
Nothing. They used to paint it with tar. They used to paint it with paint. They used to do a cementing in things. Nothing. There's a wonderful tree that I've been walking by along the trail at the nature center, that was chewed by beavers, and the opening was about yay big. And it's amazing how the tree has almost covered. It's been about 15, 20 years that this has
Hmm.
happened. But trees work on a whole different time scale than we do. And we don't have to rush in to help them. But I mean, if the rot gets in there, the rot gets in there, and that's the way it is. That's part of their senescence. But I must say, if you have a tree in your yard, do not surround it by grass. Do not put a big mulch color, a volcano of mulch around it, because every time you have grass right up to a tree, you're going to be nicking it with the weed whacker or the lawnmower, and that's why you will get a sick tree because it will be so. What you need to do is just around the drip line of the tree, plant understory tree plants. That's called, and it also gives a soft landing for all the little insects that need to get, like the pollinators that need to get into the ground under the tree. The grass, trees and grass do not go together. So put a big planting bed under your tree.
Excellent.
Keep the lawnmowers away.
We've got one last one, and it is from Jennifer Frank. It says maybe mention the Harvard Forest.
Oh, that's a wonderful place. Excellent. Thank you for reminding me. Harvard Forest, up in Petersham, Massachusetts, has the most wonderful dioramas. And actually, a couple of pictures were from the dioramas. These are large dioramas. These don't remind you of dioramas from school projects. These are dioramas that are about 5 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. They're huge, and they were done in the 1930s as part of the an effort by the government to employ artists and keep them um, fed. And they made these incredibly detailed dioramas that talked about the history of New England forests from about 1,000 years ago till the 1930s when they were making the dioramas. It's a little bit of an emphasis on timber harvest and fire suppression, but they're absolutely fantastic dioramas to give you a sense of the changes that have gone on in the New England forest landscape. And it's a great place to visit. I think the museums are open, I think from April to October, but it's a great trip. And then they have wonderful trails up at Harvest Forest, and they're doing lots of research on our New England trees. Thank you for, I should have mentioned that earlier. Thank you.
No, fantastic, fantastic. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We'll be back on March 3rd. We will have this presentation. I'll get the recording over to the Land Trust, and they will post it on the Trap Rock Ridge Land Trust YouTube page. So that'll be coming up in probably a week or so. So thank you again. And Kathy, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to say, or Marjorie? Nope.
Yeah,
All right.
I was just gonna touch base on that question about the recording. So yeah,
Yep.
we will have it available on our YouTube channel. And also the Bobolinks and Warblers Nature Lecture Series, it's actually March 4th.
Oh, March 4th. I'm
Yep,
sorry.
that's okay. I just wanted to clear up any confusion on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and thanks for coming again. And we will see you next month.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
Pat.
Take care. Bye bye.